So now let's turn to what tools are required when you're making up a wiring harness. The first one is this pair of crimpers. These are actually ratcheted and they're quite powerful. And at the top there you've got 3 different sizes, yellow, blue and red. And these crimpers are used to fasten these connectors to the end of wire cables like that. You just pop them in there, the right size, and then squeeze. And there's not much more to say really. These are ratcheted, so they're a bit more expensive than the basic model, but these are only about 25 quid, and if you're going to do a lot of wiring then they're really helpful. So moving on then, the next tool we need is this here. These are wire cutters, and these are used to strip the insulation from the end of a wire, and they're really helpful. So the next thing we need is a soldering iron. These are very cheap, about £10, and you know, they're essential. Very simple, you just plug them in, they heat up the end, and you use that to melt the solder on a wire connection. But one thing that's also very helpful to have is flux. This stuff here, this soldering paste they call it, and I'll just open this one up here, and it's just a kind of greasy kind of paste, and what you do is you simply brush a little bit of that on your connector, and it can make a big difference to how well the solder runs through the wires. So I do recommend you get some of this stuff. And the next tool I use may surprise you, but I use a hairdryer, and I use this to heat up the shrink wrap which goes over the various connectors and so on. You'd be surprised how hot one of these can get. And finally we have my trusty multimeter. Now the modern ones are fully digital now, they're LCD displays, very easy to use, and again not that expensive, you know, 30 or 40 pounds can get you a decent multimeter. This one I've had about 30 years and it's still going strong, so I'm keeping it for now. And we use it for measuring voltage around a circuit, current and resistance. I use it mostly just for measuring the fact that I have actually got a circuit. So we can turn it on, say, resistance, and if you look carefully when I do that and make a circuit, the needle moves to show me how much resistance is in that circuit. So again, really helpful, and if you are going to do a fair bit of wiring then this is pretty much essential. So having looked at these tools, now let's look at the materials you need to wire up a bike. So obviously the first thing you need is wire, but what kind of wire, how thick should it be, what gauge should it be? Now I tend to use 16 amp wire. Wire is measured by both its ampage it can carry and also the cross-sectional area of the core. This one I think is 2 mil squared, something like that, but 16 amps is about right for a bike for most applications. Now there are exceptions of course. You will need a thicker cable for the earth strap from the battery negative to the frame itself to earth the whole bike, and also you'll need a thicker cable to go from the battery positive to the starter motor, because that draws off a hell of a lot of power off the battery. So with the wires we now need to connect them together, and for that we need to sometimes solder them together, which means we need solder, this solder here, and also flux, which I already mentioned once before. And moving on, we may want to connect them together with little connectors. So let's just get this down here, and this is a little box of connectors that I might use. They come in 2 types. There's the bare ones, as it were, and then there's those which are already insulated like that. But I usually prefer to use the bare kind and then insulate them myself with shrink wrap, but other folks might do it a different way. And the next thing we need is shrink wrap, which we use to tidy up the ends of connectors, just like there. So here's a little box full of different sizes and lengths suitable for different wires. Now these can be cut with scissors to get the size you really want. Now shrink wrap also comes in long tubes like this, and this is more for sort of covering a complete wire rather than just a connector end. I don't tend to use this very often because I prefer to use a different sleeve. So to keep the wiring neat and tidy on a bike, I like to use this expandable nylon sleeving. They come in different sizes, and as you can see they can expand a hell of a lot. I mean, I could probably get 10 or 15 different little wires through here. One problem with it though, as you can see, is once you've cut the end it tends to fray. So once again, when you're finished you need to remember to slide on a heat shrink tube and it'll finish off this end nice and neat. Now I can't really show you how these work on the bike because I've not done it yet, so let's go and have a look at another bike that I did last year and see how these might work. So here we are in the back of the house in my conservatory where this drag bike is resting for the time being. I'm going to take this seat off. Hopefully we can see some of the wiring that I did last year, and here you see the various cables that have been sleeved in this expandable nylon sleeving. Now it may have been neater to keep everything in one great big thick sleeve, but this way it's a lot easier to trace problems and to repair them, perhaps when you're at the track, when you haven't got much time, when every major circuit is kept separate. But either way, I'm just here to show you how neat and tidy the wiring can look with this nylon expandable sleeving. So now let's just see how these tools work with a simple example. So the first step is to strip the plastic cover off this wire. This is a 16 amp wire which I tend to use on the bikes, and all we do is take these wire strippers here. They're quite clever how they work. We pop the wire in the top like that, and then as we squeeze, the wire's clamped down, and then we squeeze a bit more, and as if by magic, the wire's stripped off. Nice and simple. And then the next step is to crimp on a connector to the end of this wire here. So we'll pop him in there. This one's actually got a plastic covering on it. It's blue, so we'll put it in the blue section of the crimpers. We just pop the wire in there, and then we squeeze really hard like this, and that done. That's now crimp that on nice and tight. Now normally I wouldn't use these plastic covered connectors because I prefer to have the heat shrink around the ends. So let's just see how that works. So we'll just squeeze them on there like that, nice and tight, and there it is. It's not quite finished yet because now we need to add the heat shrink, and of course I did remember to slide on a little bit of heat shrink first, because if you don't you've got to start again, and that's sort of how it will go. Hopefully you can see that like that. The next phase is, it's called heat shrink because it shrinks with heat. So now I'm going to bring into play my hairdryer on a hot setting, and that will shrink down this plastic heat shrink. And just like that. Hopefully you can see that. It's now nice and neat and protected, and that could now be something that could go on the bike. So now looking at the bike, here's a couple of simple tips to think about when you're actually building the wiring harness. And the first one seems quite obvious when you think about it. What you need to do is run the main wiring harness on the left hand side of the frame. Try and put everything on the left hand side of the bike. Now the reason for that is that when the bike stops, it's on its side stand leaning over to the left, and that means any wires on the left hand side of the bike will be obscured and won't be so obvious as if they were on the right hand side of the bike where they're more easily seen. That's quite a simple idea, but it really does work, so it's something to bear in mind when you're working out where the wires are going to go on the bike. And then when it comes to the wiring itself, if we look at the kind of wires that you can get from an automotive shop, these are actually quite stiff. Even though they're not that thick, they're very stiff and quite inflexible. So I actually found that using this kind of wire here is much better. This is copper cord wire used in welding. It's used to earth welding equipment, and it's cheaper than buying automotive specific wiring as well. And it's great. It's very flexible. It carries a huge amount of ampage. You can see how thick it is. Now clearly you want to run the wiring through the bike so it's invisible if possible, or at least it doesn't stand out in any way. So first of all, this is bright red, so one thing I could do is sleeve it in that black nylon expandable sleeving, which will help to hide it. And the second thing is, let's say I want to go from the positive of the battery to this main terminal here on the starter motor. I could just run it something like this, you know, nice and simple like that. And sure enough, if I had side panels, that would probably work. But I haven't got side panels, so that would look absolutely awful. So another thing I could do is maybe run it beneath this bracket here, just to hide it a little bit better. Something like that. Yeah, a bit better, but still looks pretty damn awful. What I actually will do is run it not down, but up. So I'm going to take the line from here up, hide it behind this frame rail here, then across, again behind this top rail, and then down again. That's a lot more work to do. You need more wire, but it just makes the bike look so much better. It's going to end up something like this, all hidden away behind these frame rails, until finally it will pop out and connect there. The other thing is you want to try and bundle together wires that are close together going to the same place. So I've noticed that nearby, behind this starter motor, is a neutral light switch. So then what I can do is share this bundle here, and they'll just both follow the same route, and again it makes the job a lot neater. So there's a couple of tips for when it comes to actually wiring up the bike in a practical way. Now I'm not going to start the full wiring of the bike yet because I'm still waiting on some indicators that I've ordered. I've not yet found the best rear lamp to use, but I am looking, and when I get all the different bits and bobs that I need, and that's when I'll do the whole wiring harness in one go. I don't want to stop and start and sort of forget what I'm doing and lose my place. I'll just do it all in one big sitting. And until then, the next big job I've got to do is to build the wheels up. I've ordered the new rims and spokes. They're due next week, I think, and as soon as they arrive, I'll do a video of building up those wheels and truing them on a wheel stand. And then, assuming everything's okay, the next big expense will be the paint job. But that will have to wait because I'm not going to get it painted until I've got the bike running, dynoed, the carb set up, ignition set up, and so on. That's because there's always niggles and problems with a bike that's been built up from scratch, and I don't want to risk damaging the paintwork when the tank's coming off and on, off and on, off and on, as you're sorting out the niggles and problems that you're bound to get. That said, I've still got plenty to do before that point, and one job I want to do soon is to make a sump extension plate, which will increase the volume of the sump. Now I could buy one of those, they're quite expensive at about 100 odd quid, but I'd rather make one, and to do that I need to find some 1-inch billet plate, then mark it out, drill it, shape it, mill it, and get it on the bike. And while I'm doing that, I'll get the sump be-blasted too, because it's in a bit of a grotty state. So I'll make a few more videos about those jobs in the future, and until then, thanks for watching and cheers.